according to this chart, what is the biggest driver of inflation during the pandemic? The dark blue is the recent period.
It would be corporate profits.
And what is that percentage?
It is 54%, and that number does stay that level of high if you update that number to more recent numbers as well.
So over half of the increased prices people are paying are coming from increases in corporate profits.
Yes, the unit price index is reflected in corporate profits as opposed to other costs.
Congresswoman Katie Porter has introduced the Competitive Prices Act, legislation that would protect consumers from coordinated corporate price hikes in light of recent data showing that corporate price gouging is what's really to blame for the current rates of inflation. I'm Yasmin Khan with Rebel HQ, and there's a thing that happens when a narrative is put forth by one side of the political aisle, which could be the left or the right, but it obviously excludes some critical piece of information that would render the narrative null. For instance,
Democrats want to blame surging prices on Russia, but the truth is, their out-of-touch policies are why we are here.
The blame was pinned on climate policies for hampering the oil industry's ability to increase supply.
We need to be ramping up. We need to be ramping up right now.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine apparently had nothing to do with energy insecurity across the United States and Europe, nor did headlines about record high oil and gas profits. No, the higher prices were all Joe Biden's fault. That was the narrative that got repeated over and over throughout right-wing media. Now, as inflation is a problem affecting millions of Americans, the blame game is back, but predictably, the narrative from one side is missing a critical piece of information. Now, before we get into this, though, I want to preface everything by saying that when it comes to analyzing and understanding something as massive and nebulous as the economy, there are many individual factors that should be considered. This isn't even a left-right debate, or it shouldn't be. It's more of a class thing, and many non-1% people arguing on the side of inflation, for instance, the people who say things like, Americans should stop going to Starbucks if inflation is so bad, or the people who really want to blame the global economy on the actions or inactions of one or two world leaders, many of those people would likely benefit from the same working class focused policies and ideas that they're, for some reason, so ideologically opposed to. This isn't an issue that should be dividing Americans. Now, that said, I will do my best not to oversimplify what's going on, but the nature of these videos is that I won't be able to get into every possibility and detail of the global economy right now. Alright, so prices for goods and services are higher than they used to be, and interest rates are going up because in its effort to quote-unquote tackle inflation, our central bank, the Federal Reserve, is raising interest rates. Raising interest rates is supposed to deter competition within markets by making money more expensive to borrow. Reduced competition for goods and services drives prices down in theory. What it also does is price out most lower and middle class Americans from markets like the automobile and housing markets, providing a further boon for the already wealthy and doing little to help those who are struggling to pay for necessities like food, gas, housing, and water. Then there's the issue of supply and demand, the most basic tenets of how the economy works. Demand is still high for goods and services because people still need things that they weren't able to get during the height of the pandemic. People still need cars. People still need housing. The Fed would have to raise interest rates pretty high before demand for those things goes down, and raising interest rates that high would again disproportionately impact the lower and middle classes. In other words, the people bearing the brunt of these price and interest rate hikes are working class Americans. According to the Washington Post, credit card debt in this country is rising at a faster rate than it has in over 2 decades, a problem that compounds upon itself as families attempt to borrow more and more money in an effort to afford the higher prices of necessities. But while all of this is going on, the real driver behind exorbitant costs in the United States isn't just general inflation, it's corporate greed. Congresswoman Katie Porter is calling attention to corporate price gouging, a practice corporations are able to get away with for the most part by hiding behind a false veil of inflation. Also, corporations within the same industries are able to collude with each other to raise their prices concertedly, essentially eliminating competition and selling the idea of inflation to consumers. One example involves 2 insulin manufacturers who, between 2009 and 2016, issued 13 price increases, most of which occurred within 24 hours of each other. In doing so, both companies could plausibly blame the price increases on market conditions, and consumers aren't given a choice but to pay the higher prices since neither manufacturer is significantly cheaper than the other. The idea that the markets will adjust themselves by way of competition becomes a false premise when would-be competitors are colluding with one another to eliminate said competition within entire industries. Now, Porter also called attention to data indicating that corporate profits from 2020 to 2021 accounted for approximately 54% of price increases in the non-financial corporate sector, compared to historical data indicating that from 1970 to 2019, corporate profits only accounted for 11% of price increases. So that's 11% over the past 50 years compared to 54% over the past 2 years. This shouldn't be surprising, though. We've been seeing headlines about record corporate profits for months now, but still people seem to be dismissing price gouging as a reason for higher prices. Back in August, federal data confirmed that non-financial corporate profits in this country hit a record high of $2 trillion in the second quarter of 2022, which pushed inflation to a 40-year high. For a more industry-specific example, the profits of 8 top oil companies have increased by 235% compared to last year, all while people were conveniently blaming Joe Biden and maybe Vladimir Putin for the higher gas prices. On this, Helen Brosnan, executive director of Fight Corporate Monopolies, said, quote, "While corporations enjoy record profits and CEOs get millions more in bonuses, workers are still waiting in vain for better working conditions, and working families are still reeling from the immoral price gougers who jacked up their expenses under the guise of inflation." Now, as much as we want to believe in things like the largely debunked American dream, and as much as we want to believe that life in this country isn't a zero-sum game, the inherent reality of our economic and governmental system is that we are all in constant competition with one another. Competition is literally what drives our economy, coming right down to the basics of supply and demand. We're competing for goods and services, but also for access and for opportunities. We're competing for our ideal lifestyles. In any system where there is a finite number of resources, whether that's actual goods and services, or things like jobs or the option to live where we want to live, there will always be forces driving that competition. And for as many working class Americans as there are in this country, the reality is that we aren't the ones setting prices or wages or interest rates. We're the ones trying to operate within a system that's being dictated to us and manipulated by people who already have an upper hand. And those people are keen to keep that upper hand. Social and economic equity simply isn't as profitable for those at the top as whatever we're dealing with today. And they're the ones making up the rules as we all have no choice but to go along. All right, that's it for me. Please like and subscribe if you got something out of this content, and be sure to follow me over on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you.